Mega Man. Hello, and welcome to Real Person Reviews. I'm Sam, and I'm a real person. And today I want to talk to you about Mega Man Xtreme 2 for the Game Boy Color. A few things up front. The version I'm playing, or that I did play, I guess, and that you're seeing, is the Virtual Console version on my 3DS. But I did own the original, and as far as I can tell, there's not really any differences, so, take that as you will. Also, I'm going to be assuming for this review that you've either seen my previous review on Mega Man Xtreme, or you are kind of familiar with it, or the X series and all that, so I don't have to explain, all of the basic gameplay stuff all over again. Save a little time. And also, as always, there is a written review you can check out before, after, or instead of this video review, either by going to hubworldhq.com or just clicking on the link to it in the description. I'm sure it's there as well. I think that's pretty much everything, so let's get into it. Mega Man Xtreme 2 has a storyline that is a bit different than the first one, in that it's actually happening seemingly in the real world, and it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the events of the first one anyways. Basically, there have been reports of strange things happening with these Reploids that are, dying or something, and so you have to, check out these weird reports. So X and Zero go to check that out, and they find this mysterious island with a Reploid research facility, and they're contacted by some unknown robot dude there that basically kind of tells them, it's like, oh yeah, we're taking the things that are called DNA souls from the Reploids, and they're using them. You find out a little bit later, I guess, what they're using them for, sprinkled throughout a few cutscenes. But basically, they're taking those souls and using them for their own project, to resurrect other Mavericks, and I guess to help them take over the world or something, or it's just an experiment. I'm a little unclear on some of the details, but they're doing it for that, for their own purposes, which is also sort of just a framework to get you to be able to fight bosses you've seen in Mega Man X, X2, and X3 again. It's just another framing device for that, I guess. And he challenges you. Basically, he says, if you want to talk to me, you go and kill all the Guardians on the island, and then I'll see you face to face. So you have to go and beat the Guardians, those bosses that you've seen, right, and fight them. That's mostly the plot, without getting into the other spoilery stuff you find out later, I guess. But it's not a very plot-heavy game, so it's not a huge deal to get into that, I suppose. Gameplay pretty similar. If you start up, there's an X mission, and there's a Zero mission. You can pick either one to play as the corresponding character. X mission plays pretty much like Mega Man Xtreme in a lot of ways. You run, you jump, you shoot, you have the wall jumps and all that. You can get armor upgrades, you can get health upgrades, there's some pickups you can get in the levels when you're doing them, and it's like, oh, you can refill some of your health or your weapon meters. There's also these DNA souls that you can pick up in the levels. Basically, you're trying to save them and, figure out how to return the souls to the Reploids, so it's kind of framed like that, story-wise. And you use these to unlock items in a parts store, which is on the selection screen, where you're going to select, options or your parts, to save or to go to a boss. Go to a boss level or whatever. The level selection screen. And you use those to unlock and purchase parts in that parts store. Also, when you pick them up in the levels, there's two different kinds. One will fill up your health if you're missing health, and the others will fill up your weapons if you're missing, ammo for those. So they work kind of like variants on the health and weapon things, but those still exist on their own in there as well. And sub-tanks are still here also. It's a lot of returning things here. Even the little extras like auto-fire and auto charge and rapid fire. A lot of the stuff stays here. The parts you can get. I guess I don't know. Before we get to that, real quick, I just want to say, again, you can pick the stages in whatever order you want. You go through the stage based on the character stages from Mega Man X, Mega Man X2, or Mega Man X3. They span all the games, and they're try to be pretty faithful to those Super Nintendo games. And then you fight the boss from them. And there's the Wheel of Weaknesses going on, that kind of thing. You can complete them in any order you wish. You then can go to a set series of stages after that, leading to these end boss fights. That's the game. There's some new stuff in there too. Like the parts thing is new, where basically they're the custom parts, where you can purchase these parts as you accumulate these throughout the stages. This DNA souls, having a certain number of those unlocks more parts. So you have to hit certain benchmarks when you go to the store, and then you'll see new things unlock that you can purchase. And you use those to basically purchase them from the store as well. And these are parts. There are parts that are exclusive to X, parts that are exclusive to Zero, and there are some parts that can be used by either, but those parts can only be used on one of them at a time, because near the end of one of their campaigns, either one of their campaigns, you'll get the ability to actually switch between the two at any time you'd like. And since the armor upgrades are still there, when you switch between them, whichever one that isn't the campaign you picked will not have any of the health upgrades or any weapons, but they will have all of their armor upgrades. So there's that. Some other different, and these parts can be things like, they can increase your attack damage. They can reduce the amount of special weapon, ammunition used. They can increase the amount of health you recover when you pick up health items. There's a variety of effects for those things, and they're kind of custom parts you can put on there. X can have 4 things on him until he gets all of his armor upgrades, and then they can only have 2, whereas Zero can have 3 the entire time. Also, some other little things I want to bring up for little detail things, because they are a little different, is that when you get the body upgrade for X, you get this new ability, Giga Crush, where basically you take a bunch of damage, and once you take so much damage that fills up the meter, then you can unleash a very powerful attack that damages everything on screen massively. Also, when you get the leg upgrade with X, you're able to do a mid-air dash. If you jump and then hit jump again in mid-air, you'll dash forward. And you can also do, if you jump and then hold up and hit jump again, you can do a little dash upwards as well. So there's that new mechanic thrown in there for mobility and whatnot. A little something. It's new. So that was worth mentioning. And then once you do that, and I guess there's a Zero mission. I guess I should probably talk a little bit about Zero as well, as that's another new thing in the game. Zero is similar style of game, basically a similar setup, I guess, but Zero plays a lot differently. I mean, you still have the introductory stage. There's a branching part where the two split up, and you then have the other path you see with Zero, then, or the path that Zero took. And near the end levels, there's a part where they split up again as well, and they get a different end boss depending on which one you are as well. But Zero's gameplay is basically he has a saber instead of a gun. So he has this cool laser saber thing. And so it's close range, but it does more damage than X's Buster. He's also a larger character, so he's in a bit of a bigger hitbox. But he, without any upgrades, can already do the mid-air dash, but even with upgrades, he cannot do the mid-air dash upwards, only sideways. His 4 levels that he gets are 4 different levels and bosses, than X's. So that's different as well. his powers work a little differently as well here. I mean, when he gets the arm upgrade, he's got a special one with that, where he gets an attack called the Zero Final, which does a bunch of damage to enemies like on the screen. It freezes everything. So that's kind of his special move that's attached to his armor piece there. But for most of his techniques that he gets for beating the bosses, they work differently. For one thing, they consume ammunition based on 1 meter. He only has 1 meter for all of his different attacks, all the different special moves or whatever. And to do the moves, you usually have to either select them from the screen and then something just happens, like they just trigger them and the stuff happens in front of you after you select it, or you have to do a certain button input to then trigger it, contextually a certain button input, like maybe you're in the air and you need to do something, or do a certain button input when you're on the ground to perform the attacks. Some of the attacks, I guess to kind of balance that out a bit, do not actually consume any of the ammunition meter. You can just do them as much as you want. Others you can't, and they will consume that. So that's another difference there. I think that's mostly it. The big differences there, because none of him are projectiles. Then you have kind of a continued game you can do, where if you play as one of the characters and then beat the game and save it, you then can do a continue basically from that and pick the file where you saved. Make sure you don't select the autosave when you do that. You pick that file, you go, you play as the other character. But the other character will start with all of the moves they would get from the bosses that the previous one beat. So they start off with already 4 moves available to them without fighting those bosses. So it gives you the little edge. And beating this mode unlocks Extreme mode. They still have to get all the other stuff themselves, but that's the little advantage they get. But to do that, they unlock Extreme mode. And you can also unlock Extreme mode by getting enough of the DNA souls and then purchasing it from the store as well. And Extreme mode is a little different in that it starts you off. You can right off the bat switch between X and 0. You can be either one. And throughout most of the game, you can do that same thing, except that there are some parts where if you pick one, and you trigger this split where they have to split up and in the levels, which there are a few instances of that anyways. Whichever one you are when it triggers their little cutscene when they're going to split is the one you play as. That's where you go. Here you fight all 8 of the bosses in whatever order you'd like. The capsules for the upgrades are the same. The sub-tanks and heart locations are the same. So you can get more hearts overall in this one and have 2 sub-tanks and all these abilities at once. Difference, though, of course, is that whoever collects the heart upgrades gets those upgrades for their health. Whoever defeats the boss, also, whoever gets the final blow on the boss, gets the boss's weapon at the end of the fight. So you can't get everything with everyone. So that's another change in it. And of course, depending on what powers you have, you may have access or not have access to certain parts of other levels because you need a power to, find the secrets in them. Also, you get an extra stage and a final boss that's totally new, where you need to use both characters in order to actually beat that boss. Upon completing Extreme mode, or getting enough DNA souls and purchasing it in that store as well, is a boss attack mode. Where basically you go and there's 2 different paths you can take, and you'll fight 8 bosses. The one path is fighting the 8 bosses from the game. You can switch between X and 0. Both of them will have maximum health, as if they had both gotten all the hearts, which is something you can't do in the main game. but they will have no armor, you have no lives, you have to keep switching between them, and you only get 2 of the big health recovery items between battles, no sub-tanks, no way to refill your special weapons. You do start with all the special weapons, though, so those are basically the different circumstances you get for doing that. And you're kind of competing to try and get the best time to beat all 8 of the bosses between these 2 characters and their life bars with their abilities and all that. If you pick the other path, you'll actually fight the 8 bosses from the previous Mega Man Xtreme. Of course, their weaknesses are different because you have different weapons here, and you have Zero, so there's some differences there. But it's the same set of circumstances and trying to compete for your best times. You don't really get anything for beating those modes, just, getting your time recorded and trying to get the best one. And of course, if you die at all with either character, you lose, and you'll have to try it again if you want to beat it. As far as other stuff, the Shotokan moves do make an appearance. They're more hidden this time. They're more powerful this time. They have the same inputs, though. So they are there, and I already mentioned Rapid Fire and Auto Charge. It's a sound test, and there's I feel like I'm forgetting something, but maybe that's pretty much it. As far as a whole lot of anything else is probably going to be way too specific. So, yeah, that's the stuff, and I like that. I mean, like, there's a lot of content in this game. I think that's really good. Just having the X mission, the Zero mission, which kind of ease you into learning how to play as each character with their own bosses that are kind of tailored to how they're supposed to play and fight them. And it's still got the interesting aspect of hey, let's take these stuff from Mega Man X, mashup of X, X2, and X3, and put them together into this kind of a mashup thing to see okay, there are different stages, you have different powers on different stages. And so it's all that in the 8-bit, style, which I really like the 8-bit style. I think it looks great. I think it sounds great. And it doesn't really feel hindered by the hardware, so that's crazy. And then you can play those with different characters and kind of learn how to beat them. And then once you get to extreme mode, you get a lot of options, a lot of stuff. Like the custom part system is really cool. I really like that you can get different parts and rearrange them whenever you want. And it's I'm going to put these parts on here for this part, and for this level I'm going to put these parts on my character to do these things, and switch them out as needed. I think that's cool. Being able to switch between the characters whenever you want, being able to customize them with those different parts, and trying to decide, who gets the health upgrade, and who gets this weapon for beating this level, and what do I need to get this armor stuff or this thing, how do you want to do it? I kind of like how it makes you have to strategize more and experiment and kind of explore these different possibilities, and that actually adds a lot to the replay value. To give you an idea, I played through one of the campaign, then I did a continued campaign so I can unlock extreme mode. And then I played through extreme mode twice because I did it once getting all the stuff as X and kind of neglecting Zero, and then I played it again getting all the stuff with Zero and kind of neglecting X. And so I think that was actually pretty interesting to see how that affected how I played and how it changed things. And just being able to fight, the 4 bosses, 4 bosses that X had to fight with Zero, or the 4 ones that Zero had to fight with X, was a really interesting change of pace for it too. So it does offer a lot in replayability and experimentation, and it's giving you lots of little challenges you can try out for yourself. I think that's pretty cool, and boss attack only adds to that, especially with the cool they recycled those other bosses from the previous game, and they're a lot different because of the circumstances of being in this game. And just the idea of the boss attack mode anyways, with the 1 life and the huge health meters and all the weapons, but no armor, no sub-tanks, limited healing. That's just a cool thing where they're putting more little tweaks and circumstances, and they're putting really cool spins on stuff that's... A lot of it is familiar, plus the new bosses, of course, in the last boss fight. You have the 2 unique bosses, and also the final, final fight is, new, and it's that stuff's all cool. And I do think the Shotokan move thing, it's more well hidden here. You might not even know it's in here. But if you get it, only X can get it, I guess. But it's kind of cool because then you can just use like the Hadouken like twice, and like that'll kill all the bosses in the boss rush. It's essentially this boss part where you have to fight all the bosses before you move on in the actual main game, which I think is kind of cool. You can also, I think, get all the upgrades and everything in boss attack mode if you put in a button input or like a code or something. You can do it. Just in case that's too hard. But it's also like, again, like with the learning stuff and like kind of like easing you into it with the difficulty. There's also like with the shop, it's like, well, if you're dying a lot, maybe you want to get more stuff that's going to help you out there. So you're going to go back and like, well, you keep dying, but you keep accumulating those DNA souls along the way. So you go back and look in the DNA souls, and you're like, oh man, like because I died so much, I've actually got a bunch of these accumulated, and now more stuff is unlocked that's more helpful. So it kind of works in the idea of like trying to make it easier for people who are having a harder time with that too, and just in general that also adds a lot of stuff even for people who are super familiar with those original the original Super Nintendo games. Where they're like, oh yeah, like the SNES ones. Like I've played those. I know a lot of the aspects of this stuff then and kind of how it works, but there's a lot of interesting twists on that to still keep it really interesting for them. And it's not just like I'm playing that, but in 8-bit on the Game Boy Color. Really impressive in a lot of ways, I think. A lot of good amount of content, replayability, all that stuff. It's great, and I think it looks great, and the music kicks ass. I mean, it probably kicked ass in the originals too, but it just sounds so great here in the 8-bit renditions. So yeah, really, really like it. But could use some tweaking, I suppose. Not perfect. If you're not really a fan of the whole 8-bit thing, I guess that's just a matter of taste, but that could be a thing. You're not too fond of. And I think the shop is kind of annoying in the sense that it doesn't really explain that you're supposed to like get enough certain numbers of them accumulated to unlock things. Not like total, like how many you've collected throughout the whole game, but you have to have on hand a certain number to unlock new parts in the shop. It doesn't really explain that to you, so like that kind of sucks. You might not know it, especially if you're good or even decent, and you're like, you might think like, oh, well, there's no new things last times I looked, so a few times it's like, well, they must not have anything else that's unlocks now. I don't know. I don't understand what I have to do especially to unlock them. And it's just because you haven't died enough or collected, farmed enough of those up, gone on a grinding spree to get enough of those to unlock the other things. Which is a shame. I think it would be better if they maybe either explain that better or based it more off of like, oh, I beat this character like this stage or whatever, and now that unlocks this item or two in the part shop. I don't know. I think that maybe would have worked better, and then like it also would have added more to the idea of like the extreme mode and like the two different modes of like playing Zero Mission, you unlock Zero stuff, like X Mission, you unlock X's stuff, along with pieces of the common parts maybe. But then like in extreme mode, you'd have like, you'd be able to have to consider like, okay, who should get the heart, who should get the weapon, and which order do I want to fight them for, not only the weaknesses and all that, and how easy it is to fight them, and what I want their armor upgrade order in and everything, but also consider what other extra parts I'll be unlocking depending on what stages I do. I think that would have worked really well into the whole idea of, like having all those differences and all the like the decision making and the strategizing and all that. I also think that it's kind of a shame that you have... I mean, it's cool that you do that, but it's a little bit of a shame that you have to do that in extreme mode, that you can't like get everything with both characters and have them both be awesome. You have to kind of pick and choose either to balance them or favor one or the other or something, and like... I do feel a little bit like I wanted... That's why I played it twice, I guess partly is because I was like, I want to get everything with at least with both of them at least once. So I had to do 2 different runs to do that. Also, they could have maybe thrown in those extra 8 bosses. They could have maybe thrown those in instead of like the boss rush part in the main game, when you have to fight the 8 bosses again. Put those in instead, then it would have made it more interesting. It would have made you have to like maybe tone down how strong the Shotokan moves are, which would make them maybe not that balanced of how hidden they are, but because you don't want 2 shot bosses you haven't really encountered in this game yet. And it would have driven home the idea of resurrecting old Mavericks again, even harder, because it's for people who played the first one to be like, yeah, these are pretty old. They were resurrected before, but I guess they didn't think of that, or it was added later. I don't know why. I think it would have added a lot to that section, though. It could have been done pretty well, I think. Maybe have some better descriptions for those parts, also. Like, some of them, they don't have, like, a long enough description box. They don't really make it, I don't understand what they mean. Or, like, does the +1 and the +2 to my strength on stuff, does that stack? Or does the one that's better only count? The one that's, like, barrier extender, and it's just, like, I don't know, like, what does that mean? I don't know, some of them could be explained a little better, I guess. That would have been nice. Just little thing. I don't know, sometimes the visuals, not often, but there are a few parts where it slowed down a bit and it's a little flickering in some parts. There's also the problem of, like, a lot of times, there has to be parts of the music tracks that are cutting out because sound effects have to happen and they're using up those tracks. So, like, that's a little bit of a bummer as well, but that's just kind of, 8-bit style. It's kind of going to happen, so it's hard to be too harsh on that, but that is a thing. Also, I think the game maybe should have just been extreme mode, honestly. It should have just been, like, you do extreme mode and you can switch between X and 0, whatever you want, and it would add all the strategy of doing all that stuff, right? Playing the X mission and the 0 mission are good for learning stuff, I suppose, on how to play those characters, but at the same time, it's like, when you play either one of those, you're never going to play as the other character when you're, finally do get the ability to switch near the varied ass end of it, right? Because it's like, well, that other character has all their armor, but their health sucks, they don't have any special weapons, and I'm more used to playing as this character this whole time, so there's not really any point to me getting, playing as this asshole who is just gonna get killed right away, so it kind of discourages the switching, which I think is kind of a big part of, like, the idea that these guys are buddies, and, like, they're Maverick Hunters, like, together. And so it added a lot more to just have it. Maybe if it was just extreme mode for the whole thing, I think it maybe even would have been a little better, possibly. It really drives home the features of it a lot better, at least. So otherwise, yeah, again, like, the switching mechanic is kind of useless. It's barely used otherwise. I don't know. Again, you don't need to do that. It's fine, but, like, I just feel like that's maybe how they should have done it, and I feel like maybe it's an artificial extender that they did it the way that they did. I still have the booklet for some reason. Probably because Mega Man has always been cool. It's got, like, awesome art, so I kept this. So this is proof that I actually did have the real game, sort of. Mega Man Xtreme 2 is great, okay? I mean, I have a lot of little gripes. I think it could be tweaked. It could maybe be made to be a little better, sure. But I think this one is just fantastic with the amount of content, the replayability, and the way that it's not only an interesting, like, mashup thing, but also adds a lot of new stuff that's, like, way different. Like, you couldn't fucking play as Zero before this, I don't think. Maybe you could in one of them, but I don't think you could in X, X2, or X3. I don't know. So it's got a lot going for it, I definitely think. It's easily worth, like, $20. It's one where you're gonna get a lot of replayability out of it. If not right away, then just over the years of, like, I'm gonna pick this up again and play through this one, and it's really fun. And if you like the first one, why not get this one as well? It plays really similarly in a lot of aspects, but has a lot more to it. They really expanded on that. If you like the X games in general, this is cool because it has some familiar stuff, yet also a lot of new stuff to make it refreshing. And it's just, it's easier to recommend because of that. Like, oh, it's more of the stuff that you'd like, and it's a cool companion piece to have in your X collection. Why it wasn't on the PS2 Mega Man X collection, I'll never know. Maybe they'll get on a new one later. We'll see. Mega Man X Legacy Collection, anyone? It's probably not going to happen. And really, yeah, it's another Mega Man Xtreme. It's more Mega Man Xtreme. It's more Mega Man X. It's more 8-bit Mega Man. It's more Mega Man. It's hard to sell it much harder than that. It's really fun, really interesting. It's cool. Story's a little whatever, but that's kind of Mega Man in general for you, isn't it? But it's got a lot of awesome stuff going for it. I would recommend it more highly than the first one, even though I would say that the first one is closer to, a more standard Mega Man X game, and that one I would recommend more highly to people who haven't played Mega Man X and X2. But this is just a hell of a lot of fun, and they're both great. This one's great because of all the extra stuff it does. I can easily recommend it to more people, and it's cheap. On the 3DS eShop, it's what, like $7 or something. However much Game Boy Color games are, it's like $7. It's a pretty good deal for what you're getting. I think that's it. So, yeah. I don't know, I get it. Unless it's too extreme for you, man. Mega Man.